We live in a world that practically screams at us to do everything at once. We're told that to be productive, you have to be a master multitasker. But what if all of that is just a myth? Well, in this explainer, we're going to challenge that whole idea and dig into the real science behind what it takes to get focused.
I mean, you feel it, right? That pressure to answer an email while you're in a meeting, or text while you're walking, or try to juggle 3 big projects at the same time. It feels like the only way to stay afloat. But here's the thing. This isn't some new modern problem. People have actually been warning us about this for centuries.
Get this. Way back in 1740, Lord Chesterfield said, "There is not time enough in the year if you will do 2 things at a time." He knew, even then, a fundamental truth that we seem to have totally forgotten. Trying to do 2 things at once doesn't save you time, it just burns it. The idea that multitasking is some kind of modern superpower? Yeah, not so much.
But still, I bet you're thinking, hold on, I do it all the time. I'm pretty good at it. And yeah, it really feels like we're doing a bunch of things at once. But let's take a look at what the science says our brains are actually doing. The answer? It's probably going to surprise you. 50%. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the shocking number of people in a famous study who missed something that was literally right in front of their faces, all because they were trying to focus on just one simple task.
So this comes from a classic Harvard experiment. People were asked to watch a video of 2 teams passing basketballs, and their only job was to count the passes for the team in white. Simple enough, right? But while they were concentrating, a person in a full gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the screen, thumps their chest, and walks off. And the result? Half of the people counting the passes never even saw the gorilla. It was totally, completely invisible to them. And that just reveals the truth, doesn't it? We don't actually multitask. We just switch our attention back and forth really, really fast. And every single time we switch, we pay a little price. We miss the gorilla in the room.
Okay, so that experiment shows us what happens on the outside when we try to do too much. But to really understand why it happens, we have to look inside our own heads. And it all boils down to this concept called cognitive load. The easiest way to think about this is to imagine your brain's working memory is like the RAM in your computer. It has a limited capacity, right? It can only hold and process so much information at any given moment. When you try to multitask, you're basically trying to run way too many demanding programs at the same time, and you just overload the system. Now, let's break that down, because not all cognitive load is created equal. You've got intrinsic load, which is just how hard the task is in the first place. Then there's germane load. That's the good stuff, the mental effort you use for real learning. But then there's extraneous load, which is caused by distractions. And multitasking, it is the ultimate source of this junk food load, just cluttering up our minds and making it impossible to think clearly.
So what's actually happening in your brain? Well, this overload hits your prefrontal cortex. That's your brain's CEO. And every time you switch from, say, your report to your email and back again, your brain has to pay what's called a task switching cost. You lose a tiny bit of time and a tiny bit of mental clarity. That doesn't seem like much, but over a whole day, it adds up to a huge loss in both time and accuracy.
Okay, so if multitasking is the problem, what's the solution? Well, it's a state of mind that is the absolute polar opposite of a distracted, overloaded brain. It's this state of peak performance that psychologists call flow. I guarantee you felt this before. It's that magical feeling when you're so deep into what you're doing that the rest of the world just kind of melts away. Time gets weird, and your work feels almost effortless, even enjoyable. You're in the zone. This is the ultimate antidote to the multitasking myth. And where did that name flow even come from? Well, it came directly from the people who experienced it. When the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi first researched this state, people kept using this metaphor of being carried along by a current of water, saying they felt like they were being carried on by the flow. So how do we find this state? It's not random. Flow happens in a very specific sweet spot. See, if a task is way too hard for your skill level, you feel anxiety. If it's way too easy, you just feel bored. But when a big challenge is perfectly matched with your hard-earned skills, that is the channel where you can find flow. And what this tells us is that flow isn't just some lucky accident. It's something you can actually engineer. You can create the right conditions for it. You need to have a really clear goal. You need to get immediate feedback on how you're doing. And you need to find that perfect balance between the challenge of the task and your own ability.
Now, getting into the zone is fantastic, but let's be honest, it can feel a little elusive. The key isn't to just cross your fingers and hope for flow to happen. It's to build the underlying skill that makes it all possible, the actual habit of focus.
So the real goal is to train our brains to push back against distraction and enter that state of deep work more easily and more often. And the tool for that training is the science of habit formation. By making focus a routine, it can actually become our brain's default state.
At the core of every single habit you have, the good ones and the bad ones, is this really simple neurological cycle. It's called the habit loop. It's a simple 3-step process that our brains run on autopilot.
It breaks down into 3 easy parts. First, there's a cue. That's the trigger that tells your brain to get started. Then comes the routine, which is the action you take. And finally, there's the reward, which is the good feeling that tells your brain, hey, let's do that again. We can actually design our own loop for focus. For example, the cue could be 9 a.m., the routine could be 25 minutes of focused work, and the reward, a nice 5-minute break.
And here's the really cool part: what's happening in your brain. When you repeat this loop enough, the control of this behavior actually shifts. It moves from the effortful decision-making part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, to the automatic autopilot part, the basal ganglia. And that is how focus stops being a struggle and literally becomes second nature. So, when you boil it all down, we have a choice. We can keep trying to operate in this state of constant, inefficient chaos, or we can start to intentionally build a life of focused clarity. Let's just quickly recap the difference.
On one side, you've got the multitasking brain. It's stressed, it's overloaded, it's making mistakes, and it's constantly distracted. And on the other side, you've got the focused brain, energized, in control, productive, effective, and capable of that deep engagement we call flow. By letting go of the multitasking myth, we're not losing a thing. We're gaining real control and real productivity.
Let's end with one last really powerful number: 2 hours. What do you think that represents? Well, it's the amount of time you might be losing every single day without even knowing it. Research shows that all those workplace distractions, which are really the engine of multitasking, cost the average employee 2 hours of productive time every single day. So the final question is for you. If you could get those 2 hours back, that's 10 hours a week, what would you do with it? What would you create or learn or build? The power of focus gives you that time back.